Emily was only 22 years old, but life had already tested her in ways most people could not imagine. She worked at a small diner on the corner of a busy street, the kind of place where the smell of coffee never left the air and the clinking of plates was constant. She wore the same uniform every day, a faded dress with a white apron tied tightly around her waist. By the end of each shift, her feet would ache, her back would hurt, and her hands would smell of dish soap. Yet she smiled at every customer who walked in, even if deep inside she felt tired and hopeless. She had grown up with her mother, a gentle woman who raised her alone. Her father was never in the picture, and her mother never spoke much about him. Instead, she taught Emily to be strong, to work hard, and to find happiness in little things. But years ago, her mother passed away after a long illness, leaving Emily with no family and very little money. Since then, Emily had been on her own, trying to survive day by day. The diner job was not glamorous, but it kept her from sleeping hungry, and that was enough for her. The morning rush was always the hardest. Businessmen hurried in with their phones glued to their ears. Students ordered cheap pancakes before rushing to class, and old regulars came in for their usual black coffee. Emily balanced trays, wiped tables, and tried to remember dozens of orders in her head. Sometimes she mixed things up, but most of the time she was quick and accurate. Still, no one really noticed her. To most customers, she was just the waitress. Invisible, replaceable, and forgotten as soon as they left. But Emily had dreams, even if she rarely spoke of them. She wanted to study. She wanted to travel. She wanted to have a life that was bigger than the four walls of the diner. Sometimes during her break, she would sit by the window and watch expensive cars pass by. She imagined herself in one of those cars, dressed beautifully, free of worry, and full of confidence. Yet, reality always pulled her back. Her bills piled up at home, her small apartment was in need of repairs, and she often had to choose between buying groceries or paying electricity. She learned to live with less, but the emptiness of losing her mother was something she could never fill. The people who worked with her at the diner liked her, but they didn't know much about her life. She never complained. She never asked for help. She just showed up on time, did her job, and went home. Some coworkers thought she was shy. Others thought she was simply too busy. The truth was that Emily carried a heaviness in her heart, and talking about it felt harder than staying silent. Still, she always treated everyone kindly. If a customer was rude, she stayed calm. If a coworker was stressed, she offered to cover for them. It was in her nature to care, even when no one cared for her. Sometimes late at night, after a long shift, Emily would sit at her kitchen table and look at an old photograph of her mother. The photo showed a young woman with the same bright eyes Emily had. Smiling warmly as if nothing in the world could break her spirit, Emily would whisper, "I miss you, Mom." And imagine what her mother would say if she could see her now. She hoped her mother would be proud. Even though Emily often felt like she was barely surviving, she wished she could tell her mother about her struggles, her fears, and her dreams. But the only answer she got was silence. The world seemed unfair. Emily saw wealthy people come into the diner every day, wearing clothes that cost more than her monthly rent. They hardly noticed her as they scrolled on their phones or discussed business deals over breakfast. She often wondered what it would be like to live their life, to never worry about money, to never count coins before buying bread. She did not envy them, but she longed for just a fraction of that comfort, enough to live without constant fear of losing everything. Yet, Emily was not bitter. She held on to hope in small ways. Sometimes she treated herself to a slice of pie after work. Sometimes she bought a flower from the street vendor on her walk home. Tiny joys kept her alive. Her co-workers admired her strength even if they didn't say it out loud. There was something about her quiet determination that made people trust her. Even strangers sometimes felt drawn to her gentle presence. She had no idea that her life, which seemed so ordinary and invisible, was about to change in a way she could never have imagined. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the diner windows with a golden glow, Emily wiped down the counter, readying herself for another long night shift. She didn't know who would walk through the door. She didn't know that fate had been quietly moving pieces into place, preparing to reveal a truth that would shake her world. For now, she was just Emily, the struggling waitress with tired eyes, but soon, her life would no longer be the same. The diner's bell rang softly as the door opened, letting in a gust of cool evening air. Emily looked up from the counter where she was stacking plates. her eyes instantly catching sight of the man who had just stepped inside. He didn't look like the usual customers who came in after work for a quick meal or late-night coffee. There was something about him that stood out, his tall frame, his perfectly pressed suit, his polished shoes that reflected the dim light of the diner, and most of all, the way he carried himself, calm but heavy, as if he had walked in with 1,000 unspoken thoughts. Emily had seen rich people before. They sometimes came in when their drivers stopped at the wrong place. But this man didn't look like someone lost or impatient. Instead, he moved slowly, as if he had chosen this little diner on purpose. The chatter inside dimmed for a second as other customers turned to look at him. Some recognized his face from newspapers and television, but no one dared to say anything. Most people in the diner that night whispered quietly among themselves. "Is that him? The billionaire?" Yes, he was Mr. Richard Harrington, one of the wealthiest men in the city, known for his empire of businesses, hotels, and investments. A man who lived in mansions, traveled in private jets, and attended glamorous parties with the most powerful people. But tonight he was alone, stepping into a small, ordinary diner where no one like him was ever expected. He adjusted his coat, glanced around the room, and finally chose a seat in the corner booth. Away from the crowd, Emily, being the waitress, on duty for that section, knew she would have to serve him as she approached with her notepad in hand. She couldn't help but notice the tiredness in his eyes. It wasn't the exhaustion of a man who had worked a long day, but the deeper kind, the kind that weighed down his shoulders even though his suit was worth more than her entire year's salary. He gave her a polite nod, his voice deep yet gentle as he ordered only a black coffee. No sugar, no cream. Emily scribbled it down, though she wondered why a billionaire would come all the way here just for coffee. But she didn't ask. She simply smiled and said, "Right away, sir." When she returned with his coffee, placing the steaming cup in front of him, she noticed that he wasn't looking at his phone or reading the newspaper like most wealthy men she had seen before. Instead, he stared out the window, his fingers resting on the table as if lost in a memory. Occasionally, he would reach into his coat pocket and touch something, pulling it slightly into view before quickly tucking it back in. Emily thought it might be a watch, maybe a pen, but it didn't seem like that. It looked more like a small piece of jewelry, something personal, and the way he touched it made her curious. The diner continued with its usual noise around them, laughter from a group of friends in the back, clattering dishes from the kitchen, the faint hum of a jukebox playing an old song. But at that table, it felt different, quieter, heavier. Emily felt as though there was a story hiding behind the man's silence. She didn't know why, but she wanted to understand him. Maybe because she, too, carried unspoken stories inside her. Maybe because she saw in his eyes the same loneliness she often felt in her own heart. Mr. Harrington sipped his coffee slowly, barely tasting it. His mind was elsewhere. He was not thinking about business meetings or stock prices, or the glamorous events where people envied him. Instead, he was thinking about the past, about someone he had once loved dearly, someone who had shaped his life in ways money could never match. The object in his pocket wasn't just a random accessory, it was his most treasured possession. Something he had carried for years, something that kept him connected to the only woman who had ever truly mattered. Emily didn't know this yet. She only saw glimpses of it. The way his hand lingered on that pocket, the faraway look in his eyes, the quiet sighs he let out between sips of coffee. She felt an urge to ask him if he was all right, but she stopped herself. After all, she was just a waitress, and he was a billionaire. People like him didn't share their troubles with people like her. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that he had come here searching for something, though she couldn't imagine what it might be. At that very moment, Mr. Harrington lifted his cup again, but as he set it down, the small chain around his neck slipped out from beneath his shirt, and a silver locket dangled in plain sight for just a second. Emily's eyes immediately caught it, not because it was expensive, but because it was old and worn, clearly cherished over many years. Before he could tuck it back inside, Emily saw enough to know that this locket was important. She felt her heart skip a beat. Something deep inside her whispered that this simple piece of jewelry carried a story that might change everything. The night outside grew darker, the diner lights reflected in the windows. Cars passed by without anyone paying attention to what was happening inside. But in that small corner booth, a strange connection was quietly forming between two people who came from entirely different worlds. Emily had no idea that she was moments away from discovering something that would tie her life to his forever, and Mr. Harrington, with all his wealth and power, had no idea that the young waitress serving him coffee was about to reveal a truth that would shake him to his core. Emily tried to focus on her other tables, but her eyes kept drifting back to the man in the corner booth. Something about him seemed unusual, not just his expensive clothes or his powerful presence, but the way he sat there, lost in thought, gently touching the chain around his neck. She had noticed the silver locket earlier, just for a second, but it had stirred something in her. It didn't look new or flashy like the jewelry she sometimes saw on wealthy customers. It looked old, personal, and loved, like the kind of thing someone keeps close to their heart for years. She carried a tray of empty plates back to the counter, but her mind was still on that glimpse of silver. Her curiosity was growing stronger. Waitresses weren't supposed to ask questions. Their job was simple: smile, serve, clean, repeat. But Emily had always been observant. She liked noticing small details about people. It helped her understand them. Sometimes it even helped her cheer up lonely customers, but this locket felt different, almost like it was pulling her attention. She couldn't explain why. Mr. Harrington didn't seem to notice the way she glanced at him now and then. His coffee sat untouched for a few minutes as he stared out the window again. The rain had started to fall harder outside, droplets sliding down the glass, and he seemed far away, as if he was remembering something or someone. His hand drifted again to the locket. This time he pulled it out slightly, turning it in his fingers, his expression softening for the first time since he entered the diner. Emily felt her heart beating faster. She told herself not to interfere, yet the words left her mouth before she could stop them. "That's a very beautiful locket, sir," she said softly as she placed the bill on his table. She didn't mean to sound nosy, but the locket looked so special. She couldn't help herself. Her voice carried warmth, almost as if she was complimenting something she already admired deeply. Mr. Harrington looked up, surprised that anyone had noticed. For a moment, his usual guarded expression slipped, and Emily saw a hint of vulnerability in his eyes. He gave a faint smile, one that didn't quite reach his face. "Thank you," he said quietly. "It's very important to me." His voice was low, heavy with emotion, as though those simple words carried a lifetime of memories. Emily felt a strange shiver run through her. She didn't know why, but she wanted to ask more. She wanted to know the story behind it. She hesitated, then spoke again. "If you don't mind me asking, may I see it? Just for a second?" She was nervous about overstepping, but her curiosity was stronger than her fear. She expected him to refuse, after all. Who would hand something so precious to a stranger? But to her surprise, Mr. Harrington studied her for a moment, then slowly nodded, his fingers trembling slightly as he opened the locket and held it out toward her. The diner seemed to fade into silence. Emily leaned closer, her eyes fixed on the tiny photo inside. It was a picture of a woman, smiling softly, her hair falling to her shoulders, her eyes warm and kind. Emily froze, her breath caught in her throat. Her hands shook so badly she almost dropped her tray, because that face. She knew it. She knew it better than her own reflection. It was her mother, the very same woman whose picture sat on her nightstand at home, the woman she thought belonged only to her memories. Her heart raced wildly, her mouth went dry, but the words tumbled out in a shaky whisper. "That's my mom." She could hardly believe what she had just said. Her eyes darted from the photo to Mr. Harrington, searching for some explanation. Some reason why this wealthy stranger would be carrying her mother's picture around his neck. She felt dizzy, like the ground beneath her feet had shifted. Mr. Harrington stared at her in shock, his eyes wide, his mouth slightly open, as if the world had just tilted for him as well. His hand tightened around the locket, his lips trembling. What did you just say?" he asked, his voice breaking. Emily swallowed hard, her own eyes filling with tears. "That's my mom," she repeated, louder this time, her voice cracking. "That's her picture. I grew up looking at that face every day. I know it anywhere." Her chest rose and fell quickly as she struggled to breathe, the emotions too overwhelming. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The diner noise returned faintly in the background. Plates clattering, laughter, the jukebox humming. But at their table, time had frozen. Two strangers, bound suddenly by a photograph in a locket. both staring at each other as if they had stumbled upon a secret that had been hidden for years. Emily felt tears slipping down her cheeks. She brushed them quickly with the back of her hand, afraid of making a scene, but she couldn't stop trembling. She had so many questions, too many to even form into words. Why did this billionaire have her mother's photo? How did he know her? What did it mean? And why did it hurt so much just to think about it? She looked at him again, her voice softer now. Please, tell me, how do you have this? Mr. Harrington opened his mouth, then closed it again, his face pale, his hands still shaking. He looked down at the photo, his eyes filling with tears. He had carried this locket for years, believing it was his only link to the woman he once loved. And now, sitting across from him, was her daughter, looking at him with the same eyes, the same expression. It was almost too much for him to bear. His chest tightened, and for the first time in years, Richard Harrington felt like his carefully built world was crumbling. Emily sat frozen, still staring at the locket, still staring at him. Her entire life had just shifted in one heartbeat. Everything she thought she knew about her mother, about her own past, suddenly felt incomplete. She had no idea what was about to happen next, but deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning of a truth that would change her life forever. Emily's words hung in the air like thunder, her voice trembling as she repeated them. That's my mom. She could hardly believe what she was saying. Her own heartbeat was so loud it drowned out the diner's background noise, the clinking dishes, the chatter of other customers, the jukebox humming in the corner. All of it faded away. She felt as if the world had narrowed down to just her, the silver locket, and the man sitting across from her, the billionaire whose face was now pale and shaken. Mr. Harrington's hand gripped the locket tightly, his knuckles turning white. His eyes flickered between the small picture and the young woman standing before him. His lips trembled as though he wanted to speak, but no sound came out. He had been prepared for many things in his life, business failures, lawsuits, betrayals, but not this, not a stranger looking at the same picture he had carried close to his heart for decades and calling it her mother. Emily's breath came in short, uneven gasps. Her legs felt weak. She had to grip the edge of the table to steady herself. Her mind raced with memories. She remembered the nights she sat alone in her little apartment, staring at that same smiling face in a frame on her bedside table. She remembered the mornings when her mother brushed her hair and whispered words of encouragement before sending her off to school. She remembered the painful day when illness took her mother away forever, leaving her with nothing but photos, memories, and questions she had never been able to answer. And now here was this man, holding the same picture, keeping it close like a secret treasure. Where did you get this? Emily finally managed to whisper, her voice shaky but firm. She needed answers. Her entire body demanded them. She felt a fire rising inside her chest, confusion mixed with fear and a strange sense of hope, as though something long hidden was about to be uncovered. Mr. Harrington opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again, his voice finally breaking through, rough and unsteady. She was everything to me, he said quietly, his eyes watering. Many years ago, long before you were born, she was the love of my life. His words cracked, his throat tightening with emotion. We were young, foolish maybe, but we loved each other more than anything. And then, circumstances tore us apart. Emily's hands shook. She felt her knees weaken as she tried to process his words. Her mother? The love of his life? It sounded impossible. It sounded like a story from a book. Yet his trembling voice and tearful eyes told her it was true. She pressed her hand against her chest, trying to steady her breathing. You knew my mother? She asked, louder this time, her voice filled with disbelief. You really knew her? Mr. Harrington nodded slowly, unable to hide the tears sliding down his face. I didn't just know her, he whispered. I loved her. More than words can explain. More than I've ever loved anyone else in my life. I thought of her every single day. I carried her picture with me. I kept it here, close to my heart, because letting go of her was the one thing I could never do. Emily felt a lump forming in her throat, her eyes blurred with tears. Her mind spun with emotions she couldn't untangle, anger, sadness, longing, hope, and shock all swirled together. She remembered her mother often speaking in half-finished sentences, sometimes staring into the distance as if she was lost in memory, sometimes sighing quietly when Emily asked about her father. Could this man, this billionaire sitting before her, be part of the story her mother never told? The weight of the moment pressed down on both of them. Emily's hands trembled so much that she pressed them tightly against her apron. Her heart screamed for answers. "Why didn't you ever find her?" she asked, her voice filled with both pain and accusation. "Why didn't you ever come back?" Mr. Harrington lowered his head, shame flickering across his face. "I tried," he said softly. "God knows I tried. But life, it was complicated. I was forced to choose between her and obligations I couldn't escape. I thought one day we would find our way back to each other. But then she was gone, and I never got that chance." His voice cracked again, heavy with regret. "Losing her was the greatest mistake of my life." Emily's tears fell freely now, hot and unstoppable. She didn't know whether to hate him for not being there or to feel sorry for the man who clearly still carried her mother's memory like an open wound. The sight of him, powerful yet broken, stirred something deep in her heart. She realized that despite all his wealth, he looked more lost and empty than she had ever seen anyone. The customers nearby had started to notice something unusual happening. They glanced toward the corner booth, whispering to each other, sensing the intensity of the moment, but Emily didn't care. Her world had just been flipped upside down, and nothing else mattered. She sat down across from him, her voice shaking. "You're telling me, all these years, you carried her picture, you never forgot her, and now here I am, her daughter, standing in front of you." Mr. Harrington nodded, his tears finally spilling over, his chest rising and falling with the weight of emotions he had buried for decades. "Yes," he whispered. "You are her daughter, and seeing you now, it feels like she's here with me again. It feels like fate brought you to me, to remind me of the love I lost, and the family I never knew I had." Emily felt a strange warmth flood her chest, even through the shock and confusion. She saw something in his eyes that mirrored her own grief. Her mother had left behind pieces of herself in both of them. And now, somehow, life had pushed their paths together. Two lonely souls bound by the memory of one woman. A woman they both loved. A woman whose absence had shaped their lives in very different ways. The locket gleamed softly in the diner's dim light, its tiny photograph bridging the gap between past and present, between love lost and love rediscovered. Emily's life had already been filled with struggle and pain, but in that moment, staring at the man who once loved her mother, she realized her story was only just beginning. And so was his. Emily sat frozen in the booth, her eyes fixed on the silver locket that now lay open between them. Her chest was tight, her mind swirling with questions. She could not form into words. The picture of her mother smiled back at her. The same warm smile she had seen in her own childhood. The smile that carried her through lonely nights after her mother had passed. And now she was hearing that this man, this billionaire stranger, had carried that same smile with him for decades, like a secret he could never let go. Mr. Harrington's hands shook slightly as he held the locket, his eyes never leaving the tiny photograph. It was as if he was staring not just at the picture but at an entire lifetime of memories hidden inside it. His voice was unsteady, but he began to speak, almost as though he was speaking to himself as much as to Emily. "Your mother, she was the brightest part of my life. We met when we were young, before all of this wealth, before the world knew my name. I was just an ordinary man with big dreams, and she believed in me. She made me feel like I could do anything." Emily's throat tightened. Her heart ached to hear him talk about her mother like that. She had never known much about her past. Her mother rarely spoke of her younger years. And now, here was a piece of the puzzle being revealed by someone she had never met before. She leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me more, please." His eyes glistened with tears, and he nodded slowly. "She had a laugh that could fill a room. Do you know that? Whenever she laughed, it was impossible not to smile with her. We used to sit in small cafes for hours, talking about the future. We dreamed about building a life together. A home, a family. I thought we had forever, but life had other plans." He paused, his jaw tightening as he swallowed hard. "My family. They didn't approve. They thought she wasn't good enough for me. They wanted me to marry someone who would benefit the business, someone with influence. I was young and foolish. I let their voices get in my head, and slowly, the world pulled us apart. Emily's heart clenched. She wanted to be angry, to shout at him for not fighting hard enough. But when she looked at his face, she saw only pain, deep and unhealed. The kind of regret that lived in a person's bones, her own eyes filled with tears. "She never told me about you," Emily whispered. "Not once. She never mentioned your name." Mr. Harrington closed his eyes for a moment, as if those words pierced him. "Maybe she wanted to protect you," he said softly. "Maybe she thought I had abandoned her. Maybe she didn't want you to carry the same pain she carried. She was always stronger than me. She always knew how to shield the people she loved, even if it meant keeping secrets." Emily thought back to the times her mother would stare out the window, her eyes distant, as though she was remembering someone. The way she sometimes smiled at nothing, or the way her voice would break when certain love songs played on the radio. Emily had never understood then, but now it all began to make sense. Her mother had carried her own hidden memories, just as this man had carried the locket. The billionaire's voice grew softer, his hands trembling as he ran his fingers over the silver chain. "When I heard she had passed, it broke me. I found out too late. I didn't even get to say goodbye. All I had left was this locket and the memories we once shared. I thought that was the end, but now..." His eyes lifted to Emily, his gaze heavy with emotion. "Now here you are, her daughter, the living reminder of everything I lost and everything I loved." Emily felt a tear slide down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away, but inside, her emotions were too heavy to hide. She had grown up believing her mother was all alone, that no one had truly loved her except her. Now she realized there had been someone else, someone who had loved her mother deeply, someone who still carried that love even after all these years. The thought both comforted and confused her. Her voice shook as she spoke again. Do you regret it? Letting her go?" Mr. Harrington's face crumpled. His eyes filled with tears he no longer tried to hide. "Every single day," he whispered. "There is not a morning I wake up without thinking of her. Not a night I close my eyes without wishing I had fought harder. My wealth, my success, all of it feels empty when I think about the one thing I lost and could never replace." Emily looked at him for a long moment, seeing not the billionaire the world admired, but a broken man haunted by love and regret. She realized that despite all his power, he was just as human as she was, maybe even lonelier. Her heart softened, even though part of her still hurt for the mother who had carried that silence alone. She reached out, her hand trembling, and touched the locket gently, her fingers brushing against his. "She would want you to forgive yourself," she whispered. "That's the kind of woman she was." He looked at her with tearful eyes, his lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, he let out a shaky breath, as though the weight of years was finally beginning to lift. For the first time in decades, he didn't feel completely alone. Sitting across from him was not just a reminder of the past but a chance for something new, something meaningful, and Emily, though overwhelmed, felt the same. She could feel her mother's love connecting them, even from beyond. In that quiet corner of the diner, surrounded by strangers, two hearts began to mend, both bound by the memory of a woman who had loved fiercely, lived quietly, and left behind a legacy neither of them had expected to share. The night felt heavier and brighter at once, as though fate itself had placed them in each other's path to finish a story that had been left incomplete. Mr. Harrington sat in silence for a moment, his hands still clutching the silver locket, his chest rising and falling as though every breath was a struggle. He had spent decades building walls around his heart, hiding his pain behind wealth and power. But now, with Emily sitting across from him, those walls began to crumble. The emotions he had buried for so long started to pour out, and he could no longer stop them. His lips trembled, his eyes filled with tears that blurred his vision. He tried to speak, but his voice broke in the middle of the first word. A choked sound escaped his throat, and suddenly, he was no longer the strong, untouchable billionaire that people admired and envied. He was just a man, broken, grieving, and lost. His shoulders shook as he lowered his head, covering his face with both hands, his body trembling as sobs tore through him. Emily froze, her heart tightening at the sight. She had seen people cry before, but never like this, never with so much raw pain. It was as though years of sorrow, regret, and longing had all come crashing down at once, spilling out of him in a flood that could not be contained. She felt her own eyes blur with tears, watching him crumble under the weight of everything he had carried alone. The other customers in the diner glanced over, their voices falling into whispers. Some looked concerned, others confused. But no one dared to interrupt. The scene unfolding in that corner booth felt too intimate, too powerful. It was as if the entire room knew that something life-changing was happening right before their eyes, and they could only watch in silence. Emily's hands shook as she reached across the table, her fingers brushing lightly against his. She had spent her life serving strangers without ever truly connecting. But this moment was different. This man was not just another customer. He was tied to her in a way she had never imagined, through her mother, through love, through fate itself. "It's okay?" she whispered softly, her own voice trembling. "You don't have to hold it in anymore." Mr. Harrington lifted his face slowly, his eyes red, his cheeks wet with tears. He looked at her with an expression so vulnerable that it broke her heart all over again. "I failed her," he whispered hoarsely. "I failed the only woman I ever truly loved. I let her slip away because I was too weak to fight for her. And now she's gone forever. Do you know what that feels like? To lose everything that matters and realize it was your own fault." His voice cracked, the words heavy with anguish. Emily shook her head, tears streaming down her own face. "No," she whispered. "You didn't fail her, you loved her. That's what matters. She may not have told me about you, but I know my mother. She wouldn't have carried her own silence unless she still cared for you too. She never stopped loving deeply. I could see it in her eyes. She was the kind of woman who carried love quietly, even when it hurt." Her words seemed to pierce through him. His breath hitched as another wave of tears broke free. He pressed the locket to his chest, clutching it tightly as though it were the only thing holding him together. "I thought I would never see her again," he said, his voice breaking with every word. "But now I see her in you. You have her eyes, her strength, her kindness. It's like she's sitting here again, only this time it's through you." Emily's heart ached as she listened. She had spent so many years missing her mother, feeling like she had been left with nothing but loneliness and memories. But now, hearing this man speak with such devotion, she realized her mother had left behind more than just memories. She had left behind love. Love so strong it had survived decades of distance and silence. Love that still lived in the heart of the man who now sat crying in front of her. Without thinking, Emily moved around the table and sat beside him, gently placing her hand on his shoulder. She felt his body shake under her touch, but she didn't pull away. "You're not alone anymore," she whispered softly. "Maybe you couldn't be there for her then, but you're here now with me, and maybe that's what she wanted. Maybe she wanted us to find each other." Her words hit him like a bomb on an open wound. He leaned into her touch, letting himself cry fully for the first time in years. The diner around them seemed to fade away. Time itself felt suspended. It was just the two of them. Two broken hearts mending together through shared pain and love, strangers only hours ago, but now bound forever by a woman who meant everything to them both. The sound of his sobs softened after a while, his breathing steadied. Though his eyes were still wet, he turned to Emily, his expression raw and open. "I don't deserve your kindness," he whispered. "But I promise you, if you let me, I will be there for you. I will honor her memory by caring for you, by never walking away again. You are all I have left of her, and I can't lose you too." Emily's tears fell freely, but she managed a small, trembling smile. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if she was ready to let this man into her life. But she knew one thing for certain. Her mother's love had not been lost. It had only been waiting, hidden, until fate brought it back to her in this unexpected way. "We'll figure it out," she whispered, her voice soft but sure. "Together." In that moment, Mr. Harrington lowered his head again. But this time not in despair, this time in gratitude, in relief, in the fragile hope of a second chance. His tears still flowed, but now they carried a different weight, not just sorrow, but also the beginning of healing, the kind that only comes when hearts, broken and lost, finally find each other again. The diner felt strangely quiet now, even though people still moved around, dishes clattered, and conversations whispered across tables. But for Emily and Mr. Harrington, it was as if the world outside their corner no longer existed. His tears had slowed, but his eyes were still red, the silver locket resting between his trembling fingers. Emily sat beside him, her heart heavy with everything she had just learned. The silence between them was not empty. It was full, filled with memories, regrets, and the weight of truths finally uncovered. Mr. Harrington took a deep breath, his voice still rough from crying. "For so many years, I thought I had lost everything when I lost her," he said, staring at the locket. "I built my empire. I became powerful, wealthy, respected, but inside, I was empty. No amount of success ever filled the hole she left in my heart. And now, sitting here with you, it feels like life has given me something I don't deserve. A second chance, not with her, but with you, her daughter." Emily's chest tightened. She looked at him carefully, trying to see beyond the tears, beyond the polished suit and reputation. She saw a man carrying decades of regret, but she also saw something else. Hope, fragile and new, shining in his tired eyes. She swallowed hard before speaking. "You mean, you want to be part of my life?" His gaze lifted to hers, steady now, full of sincerity. "Yes," he whispered. "If you let me, I want to know everything about you, your childhood, your dreams, your struggles, everything I missed because I wasn't there. I want to give you the care I couldn't give her. I know I can never replace her. I know I can't undo the years, but maybe, just maybe, I can make the future different, for both of us." Emily's heart raced. The offer stunned her. She had lived her entire life without family, working endless hours just to survive. She had never expected anything to change, never expected anyone to show up and say they wanted to share her burdens. The thought of opening her life to this man felt overwhelming. Yet something deep inside told her this moment was real, that he wasn't speaking as a billionaire offering charity. He was speaking as a man desperate to hold on to the last piece of the woman he had loved. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand, her voice quiet but steady. "I don't know if I'm ready to let someone in," she admitted. "I've been on my own for so long. It's hard to imagine what it's like to have someone care like that. But hearing you talk about her, the way you loved her, it makes me feel like maybe I can trust you. Maybe we can build something from that love she left behind." Her words made his eyes glisten again. He nodded slowly, his expression both relieved and emotional. "You are more like her than you realize," he said gently. "The strength in your voice, the kindness in your heart, even your doubts. It's her. I can see her in you, and being with you feels like she is still here with me, guiding me, reminding me not to waste this chance." Emily lowered her gaze, her fingers tracing the rim of the coffee cup still sitting on the table. She thought of her mother, of all the sacrifices she had made, all the secrets she had kept. She thought of the nights when she saw her mother lost in thought, maybe remembering him, maybe wishing things had turned out differently, and now, here she was, standing in the middle of the story her mother had never told, but one she had lived every day of her life, without knowing it. Her voice was soft when she spoke again. "I used to wonder if my mother had ever been loved, if she had someone who truly saw her, because she never said much, and now, hearing you, I finally know she was loved, deeply. That means more to me than you can imagine." Mr. Harrington's lips trembled into a faint smile, the kind that carried both pain and relief. "She was everything," he whispered. "And through you, I can honor her memory. I can be there for you in ways I should have been for her, not because I feel guilty, but because I want to, because you are family, even if not by blood, you are hers, and that makes you mine too, if you'll allow it." Emily felt her tears return, but this time they weren't heavy with sorrow, they were softer, warmer. She had spent so many years thinking she had no one, and suddenly here was this man, broken but sincere, offering her not just comfort, but belonging. She didn't know if she was ready to accept everything, but she knew her heart was opening, slowly, carefully, and that was enough. She reached out, her hand resting lightly on his. "We can try," she said softly. "We can learn about each other, step by step." Maybe that's what she would want, for us not to stay broken, but to find healing in each other. His hand closed gently around hers, his touch firm yet tender. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice full of emotion. "I promise you, I won't walk away this time, not from you, not from the memory of her. I will be here, no matter what." The diner lights flickered softly above them, casting a golden glow on the scene. Around them life went on as usual, but for Emily and Mr. Harrington, Something extraordinary had happened. Two souls, lost and lonely in their own ways, had found each other through love that had never truly died. The love of a woman who was gone, but whose presence lingered, connecting them forever. Emily squeezed his hand gently. For the first time in years she felt a small spark of hope in her heart, fragile but real. She realized that her story wasn't one of endless struggle after all. Maybe it was a story of discovery, of connection, of finding family in the most unexpected places. Her mother's love had not ended with her passing. It had only changed shape, leading her here, to this man who wept for her, and who now wanted to care for her daughter. In that quiet booth, under the hum of diner lights and the sound of rain against the windows, Emily and Mr. Harrington began to imagine a new future. Not one free of pain, but one full of healing, love, and the possibility of family. The rain outside had slowed to a gentle drizzle. The diner lights glowed warmly against the dark night, and Emily sat quietly, her heart still heavy yet strangely lighter than it had been in years. Across from her, Mr. Harrington held the silver locket close to his chest, as though it were the last piece of a treasure he could never let go. Their eyes met again, and for the first time, there was no awkwardness, no distance, only an unspoken understanding. Two lives had collided by chance, but neither of them believed it was only chance anymore. Emily had lived so long thinking she was invisible, just a struggling waitress in a crowded world. Yet here was a man who looked at her as if she mattered more than anything. His gaze was not filled with pity, but with recognition, as though he had finally found something precious he had been searching for. She felt her throat tighten as she thought of her mother. It was almost as if her mother's spirit had guided this meeting, as if she had wanted her daughter not to feel alone anymore. Mr. Harrington cleared his throat, his voice still soft, but steadier now. "You've given me something tonight I never thought I would have again. A reason to hope, a reason to feel connected. I lost her. But in you, I see her light still burning, and I cannot turn away from that. I don't want to." His words carried weight. They weren't promises made to impress. They were truths spoken from the deepest part of him. Emily's eyes blurred with tears again, but these tears were different. They weren't only from sadness. They carried relief too. For years she had walked home in the dark, worked endless shifts, counted coins at the grocery store, and wondered if life would ever give her something more than struggle. Now she felt that maybe her story was beginning to change, not because of money, but because she no longer felt so alone. She finally had someone who shared the memory of her mother, someone who understood. She took a slow breath, steadying herself. "I don't know what the future will look like," she admitted, her voice trembling but honest. "I'm scared, because I've never had anyone to rely on. I've only ever had myself. But if you really mean what you're saying, if you truly want to be part of my life, then maybe we can try. Maybe we can build something together, even if it's not perfect." A gentle smile spread across Mr. Harrington's face, a smile that carried both sadness and joy. "It doesn't have to be perfect," he said softly. "It just has to be real, and I promise you, everything I do from now on will be real. No masks, no walls, just the truth. You deserve that, and she deserves that too." They sat in silence for a while, not the uncomfortable kind, but the peaceful kind that only comes when two people no longer need to fill the air with words. Emily could hear the ticking of the old diner clock, the faint hum of the coffee machine, and the rain tapping softly against the window. Life outside was ordinary, but inside her, everything had shifted. This night would not be forgotten. It had changed her path forever. As their coffees grew cold, Mr. Harrington finally spoke again. "I want to help you, not because I pity you, but because I care. I want to know your dreams, the things you've had to push aside. I want to see you live a life where you don't have to struggle every single day. Please let me do that. Not as a billionaire, not as some stranger, but as someone who loved your mother and now cares for you." Emily's chest ached. Her instinct was to refuse, to say she didn't need help, but deep inside, she knew she had always longed for someone to believe in her, someone to lift her up instead of watching her fall. She thought of her mother again, and somehow, she could almost hear her mother's voice, gentle and warm, telling her it was okay to accept love. It was okay to let someone in. Her lips trembled as she whispered, Maybe I can let you." For the first time that night, Mr. Harrington's tears carried a trace of joy. His heart felt lighter than it had in decades. He reached across the table, taking her hand gently, his grip steady but tender. "Thank you," he said, his voice breaking softly. "I will not let you down." The night slowly faded, the diner began to empty, and Emily realized her shift was ending. Yet she felt no exhaustion, only a strange new energy inside her, as if life itself had given her a second wind. When she stood up to leave, Mr. Harrington stood too, as if it was natural, as if he could not let her walk out into the night alone anymore. Together they stepped outside. The rain had stopped, the air was cool and fresh, the city lights shimmered on wet pavement. It felt like the world itself had been washed clean, ready for something new. As they stood by the door, Emily looked up at the man beside her, a billionaire, yes, but also a man who carried the same grief she did. A man who loved her mother, and now wanted to care for her. She realized that she didn't feel as small as she had earlier that day. She didn't feel invisible. For the first time, she felt seen, truly seen. The night ended not with grand promises or dramatic gestures, but with something far more powerful, a quiet bond. A beginning. Emily walked home that night with her heart beating fast, her eyes still wet with tears, but her spirit lighter. She clutched her mother's memory close, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that tomorrow might be better than today, because she was no longer alone. And somewhere deep inside, she felt her mother's presence, smiling, as if proud that the two people she had loved most in the world had finally found each other. Not in the way anyone expected, but in the way destiny had written all along.